Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night Podcast. Today we are talking all about the 1980 John Cassavetes classic Gloria. I'm your now realizing skimming from the mob all these years might have consequences for me in the future host Adam. Joining me, as always, is my just giving the kid to the gangsters right away and making the movie much shorter co-host Kristen. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Adam. How are you?
Good. And of course, the show wouldn't be complete without regretting taking parenting advice from Buck Henry co-host Rob. Hi,
yes,
Rob.
Sir. Yes, sir. How you doing?
Well, you know, sometimes we come out parent of the year. Sometimes we end up splattered across an apartment in New York City. You know, those are the breaks. But we are talking all about Gloria, the 1980 film from John Cassavetes. What is your guys' familiarity with the movie and John Cassavetes?
So I never heard of this movie before Rob chose it. And Cassavetes, I had to look up movies that he'd done to see if I was familiar with anything. And pretty much the only thing on my radar was The Notebook. So that's pretty much...
No. We'll get to his family is involved in The Notebook. He is
right.
Not, because he was very dead.
Yeah, but when you Google his name, that's what comes up. So that's like the only association really I've got.
You never saw Rosemary's Baby?
Oh, that's right. He did do Rosemary's Babies. I have seen that one too.
Yeah. Dirty Dozen isn't really up your alley. I think you'd like The Fury. That's Brian De Palma. It's kind of like Carrie.
Okay.
It's like Psychic Kids, which it makes sense because De Palma also did Carrie.
Okay, yeah.
And it's Kirk Douglas is the main lead in that. You might like it.
I'll have to look that one up.
Cassavetes has this history as an actor and a filmmaker. So Rob, and so The Fury is one of, and Rosemary's Babies are some of his as actor. Rob, I know you have a history with Gloria that we'll kind of talk about, but, what did you know, have in your mind about Cassavetes?
Actually, I still don't know all his stuff. I know you just said The Fury and Rosemary Babies. Rosemary Baby, I definitely know those two.
Yeah, Dirty Dozen. He's in Dirty Dozen, which you would know. I even doing research for this, I don't know everything. We'll talk about, some of his work, but as a director, he did Woman Under the Influence, Opening Night, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, Minnie and Mouskowitz, Husbands. Any of those ringing a bell?
No.
Yeah. No. He's very much like a film school kind of director, where I heard a lot about him for years and years and always got the impression that he's very much beloved by the film school art house crowd and, wasn't sure if he was up my alley. And, for me, it's honestly, so I had, I'd seen some movies like The Dirty Dozen and The Killing and some other stuff that Cassavetes had been in before we ended up doing this episode. But hadn't really, delved into him or his work that much, especially his work as a filmmaker. And so, doing research for this, I watched a number of his films and, we'll talk about that later. But Rob, what's your history with Gloria? Because you're the one who made the pick this month.
I don't know when I first saw this film.
Probably 1980.
I just know it was pretty early in my life. I don't think it was in 1980, though. I don't think it was at the movie theaters, but I don't know for sure. But at some point, got really when I say attached to it, it was just very reminiscent of a lot of things about my childhood and living in the inner city. And, I will talk about different things like being raised by, a strong woman. And there were a lot of elements that I really related to as far as like city life, and especially how it was sort of in the late 70s, early 80s when I was just turning 7 or 8, just, absorbing things around me. So that kind of when we talked about the Warriors and, I know I'm painting a kind of grimy picture, but it's just things that always been sort of attracted to things like graffiti on subways and neon signs and just things that are very, very multicultural atmospheres and all that. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Well, and, it's sort of like what we talked about with toys is sometimes it's hard to even put a finger on why certain movies stick with you the way they do, you know?
They just come
Correct.
to you at the right time in your life and the right
Yeah.
moment.
Definitely an interesting movie with an interesting filmmaker behind it. So, excited to talk with you all about it today. In today's episode, we are going to learn what exactly method acting is, if you can earn a TV credit in utero, and most importantly, if it's a good idea to argue with an actual mafia hitman about movie realism, because today we are talking all about the 1980 John Cassavetes classic, Gloria. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor is No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, an in-depth 13-episode radio and live streaming series celebrating Billie Holiday's extraordinary musical legacy. The program explores her early life, groundbreaking singing style, and the powerful impact of Strange Fruit on the civil rights movement. It is produced by the award-winning Steve Robinson and written by NEA Jazz Grandmaster and host of Jazzology, Willard Jenkins. No Regret is narrated by Rhonda Hamilton. The series features interviews with Angela Davis, Cassandra Wilson, Beth Roars, Andromeda Toure, Phil Schaap, Dan Morgenstern, and many more. All episodes of No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, are now ready for you to stream on savagecontent.com/no regrets. That's savagecontent.com/no regrets. John Cassavetes was born on December 9th, 1929 in New York City to a Greek immigrant father and a Greek-American mother. He spent the majority of his first 7 years living with his family in Greece, and when he returned to the States, spoke little to no English. By high school, he was very active in school activities such as the school paper, yearbook, football, and the interclass play. Despite this experience with acting, he headed to college after graduating with no particular direction in mind. After a brief time at 2 different schools, Cassavetes dropped out and bummed around Florida for a short time before hearing that another school back in New York might be right for him, especially because it was, quote, packed with goyles, unquote. Whatever his initial reason for attending, John thrived at the Academy for the Dramatic Arts, growing to love the craft of acting. It was here that he would form the foundation of his views on acting that would shape his career in the future. It was also at the Academy that John met someone very important to his professional and personal life. At the Academy, new students had to audition to be accepted, and anyone, teachers, other students, were allowed to sit in and observe those auditions. One day, Cassavetes was sitting in on some new student auditions when a blonde in a red dress came on stage. He was left stunned, not just from her beauty, but also her electric talent. He leaned over to a friend who was sitting with him and said, "I'm going to marry that woman." The woman on stage was Gena Rowlands. The only problem with his plan to marry her was she had no interest in marrying or dating anyone. She had one focus, one desire since childhood, to be an actress. Gena had been born on June 19th, 1930 in Madison, Wisconsin, to a housewife mother and a father who was a member of the Wisconsin Progressive Party. Her father's involvement in politics would see the family move multiple times. Much like Barry Levinson, whom we covered on our Toys episode, Rowlands was sickly as a child. But unlike Barry, who is a little younger, thus allowing him to spend his sick time watching some of the early days of TV, Rowlands didn't have that option. Instead of watching TV like all of us, she read books. That reading let her feel like she was living different lives, which, as she said, is essentially what acting is to her, living a different life for a little while. From that time on, all she wanted to be was an actress. She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to have kids. She just wanted to be an actress. After time at the University of Wisconsin, she auditioned for and was accepted at the Academy of the Dramatic Arts.
She hit the nail on the head. I mean, I am a voracious reader. I love to read. And and also you could argue that TV and movies do the same thing of kind of living different lives, seeing different experiences. But a book can be so immersive to be able to give you that. And especially if it's a longer book, you get to just sit in the world for a little bit longer than a film. And so I really connected when you said that. Like, as soon as like you quoted what she said, I was like, she nailed it. Perfect.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's perfect. That's a quote from later in life. And so that experience clearly stuck with her, throughout her life and, was a big motivating factor. Very interesting backgrounds. And it's, especially, Gina, clearly was very animated towards acting, her, just about her entire life. But it's interesting to see, because John would go on, as we'll see, to form very strong opinions about the craft of acting and how it should be approached. That it's very interesting that he kind of discovered it later in life.
Yeah, and I like learning a little bit more about his background. Um, like living in Greece must have been a very interesting experience, and then being able to come over.
Yeah, well, especially that period in Greece. I'm not super great on Greek history, but I believe it was a little tumultuous, because like if he was born in 1929 and spent the first 7 years there, that's all in the lead up to, that's the 7 years that are the lead up to World War II. World War II starts like 1938 and spreading across Europe. And even though it wasn't a big theater of combat, Greece was definitely involved. I think they had their own fascist movement there. Definitely could have been some very interesting times to be in Greece. But then, it was also interesting, that I read, he came back to the country speaking little to no English, but then seemed to assimilate very quickly, very well, very rapidly, to the point that you don't have much of an accent on him. That was interesting for me to read as well, because like you wouldn't have thought that, watching him perform. Rowlands and Cassavetes would grow close during Gina's time at the academy. Despite this, every time he would ask her out, she would turn him down, as she was determined to focus on acting. Finally, after she graduated, she agreed to go out with him, and they were married soon after. Now out in the world, the couple focused on building their individual careers and their family together. Gena would appear in the touring version of The 7-Year Itch and on Broadway in a play called Middle of the Night alongside Edward G. Robinson. If you just read that as on Broadway in the middle of the night, it sounds like she just appeared randomly in the middle of the night with Edward G. Robinson. So,
She might have.
Well, yeah. Well, and especially if you read it in the sentence, Gena would appear in the touring version of The 7-Year Itch and on Broadway in the middle of the night alongside Edward G. Robinson. It almost sounds like they did The 7-Year Itch in the middle of the night on Broadway with Edward G. Robinson. Very confusing sentence. I'd slap the idiot who wrote that, but he's busy reading to you all. So she would enter TV with the short-lived syndicated series Top Secret in 1954, which would lead to many guest appearances on other shows in the following years. John had his first big break after numerous parts in B pictures and TV serials with his appearance in The Night Holds Terror, playing a vicious killer in 1955, and followed it up as a juvenile delinquent in the live TV movie Crime in the Streets in 1956. He got his first starring role opposite Sidney Poitier in 1957's Edge of the City. And in 1959, he would star in his own TV show, Johnny Staccato, though it only lasted 27 episodes despite critical acclaim. 1959, Gena and John welcomed their first child together, son Nick.
It's interesting that she was like, yeah, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids, and then she ends up doing all of it anyway. He wore her down, I guess.
Well, I think it's that, and we can talk even more about that as we go on. Some of the relationship dynamics they might have had together. like if she had kids, got married and had kids, like that would mean she couldn't have a career. And she found a partner who was not only encouraging her, to do both, but to reach for the moon in her career. And, that allowed her to, see that as an option. So, I think it was finding, someone who was supportive of her in all aspects, not just, okay, now we're married, stay home, cook, clean, watch the kids.
Right. And I think that's really what it was. She just didn't want to have the housewife life, which is very fair. But very cool that she was able to balance both, but it's also, it can be hard to balance both, as I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah.
So I was born in '73, and most of my my recollections of Gena Rowlands are in the latter half of her career. And because of this movie and just doing a little research, I was looking back at her younger years. Wow, she was a knockout, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, even just like looking at her in like a Woman Under the Influence, which is like 10 years, 7 years before, I mean, for her age, she looks very good in Gloria, but I mean, you start to see it.
Correct.
Well, and kind of speaking of the reverse, I know people aged differently back in the 50s, but seeing I have not seen the movie Crime in the Streets or the live TV movie Crime in the Streets, but seeing a picture of John Cassavetes from that in 1956 when he would have been approximately 27 years old, and his character is supposed to be this juvenile delinquent is laughable, at least to me.
Right.
Because he very much looks like a man in his, pushing 40, not necessarily a man even pushing 30.
Life was hard.
I know, but it's that old joke about, you watch some of these old movies and TV shows, and they'll be referring to someone as a kid, and it's like, kid, I'm pretty sure he's about ready to collect Social Security. But Johnny Staccato, it's so the way some of this stuff lines up when we're doing the show is so weird. I was not familiar with the show until last year I was doing that watch through of Homicide, Life on the Streets, the show from the 90s, the cop show. And in it, they had a flashback to one character as a kid in the 50s. And, they're kind of talking about like, why did this kid want to become a cop or something? Like, I can't remember the exact plot, but they showed him at home watching TV, and he's, watching this show with this private detective, and he's, really into it. And it's kind of insinuating that this is part of what made him want to become a detective himself and influenced his personal style and stuff. It's and the show happened. I had to look up the show to see if it was real because I'd never heard of it before, and it was Johnny Staccato.
Nice.
Yeah. And so then, I watched through that, and then, a few months later, Rob is like, hey, I'm going to do Gloria, so that means you need to start learning everything you can about John Cassavetes in a short period of time.
It's all connected.
Yes. Well, and that will continue as we go on. So, slowly starting out, building that family, seeming to build that career, but there's a little bit more. In addition to his work as an actor, John also had a lot of ideas on the craft of acting and how it should be approached/taught. These ideas led Cassavetes and his friend Burt Lane, the father of future actress Diane Lane, to open an acting workshop. Now, these ideas, Cassavetes' approach is important because it informs the films and career decisions he will make later on, which means we get to have so much fun and talk about the minutiae of acting theory. Everyone's favorite. Are you ready, kids? Let's go. In the early 20th century, Konstantin Stanislavski, a Russian theatrical practitioner, a catch-all term for someone who isn't well described by terms like actor, writer, director, producer, because usually they're doing a number of these roles all at the same time, began to develop and organize his training, preparation, and rehearsal techniques into a system. It focused on removing the conscious mind of the actors, so they instead relied on emotional experience and subconscious actions. To achieve this would involve developing character motivation and backstory, along with tapping into emotional moments from the actor's own past to trigger the needed feelings for the scene. This is summarizing and generalizing and grossly simplifying, so we are not here all day. Just think of all the actor stereotypes about, so what's my motivation, when they just need to say lines to sell you a Kia or something like that. That comes from this. Stanislavski's method became very popular, especially in the US, as the 20th century went on, and was further refined and added to by Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, and Sanford Meisner. Together, those three would found the Actors Studio in New York City, one of the most well-known schools for acting in the country. Cassavetes opened his workshop in specific opposition to the Actors Studio. He felt their approach was too moody, broody, and full of anguish, when acting should instead be an expression of creative joy. To John, it had become a rote mechanical machine like the one it was trying to replace. He also felt that the focus on the character's emotion, what they were feeling in the moment, was too superficial. That even when someone felt an emotion, it was rarely expressed bare, instead hidden by masks of situation and goals and ego, to the point that the big showy emotion often seen with method acting was unrealistic. In addition to his disagreement with the studio on approach and execution, he disliked the cult of personality that had since arisen around Strasberg, Adler, and Meisner, with Cassavetes' academic Ray Carney saying he was scorning it as only someone who was half envious could, unquote. Finally, he felt the studio had undue influence with the New York casting directors that negatively impacted actors who did not go through it. So he opened his workshop as an alternative and focused more on improv and making things feel, quote, as real as possible, unquote, as we'll kind of see and discuss in some of his later films.
It kind of just feels like, potato. They're doing the same thing, really.
Very much does, especially when you see the results. That's why I said it really gets into a minutia thing, because for as much as he is against it, there is not a ton of difference in how they approach it. Some of this is also part of the problem is you're trying to glean all this just from reading, not just, Wikipedia, but other articles and, the stuff, just excerpts on, his approach. I'm sure if I'd, had the time and opportunity to read through all of the Cassavetes on Cassavetes book by Ray Carney, I would have greater appreciation for what differentiates his approach from the method approach. It just does get a little lost in the weeds, and oftentimes they end up in the same place with a lot of the same presentation. We'll also see and kind of talk about, because he is, improv is a tool that is used in method. It's a tool that's used in many other forms of acting. And I guess let's step back and kind of clarify, because especially these days, improv is associated with improv comedy. Though improv comedy started from all these games that they would do to have a little more fun and loosen up, but improv itself started as a way to try and understand your character. So the idea would be like, let's say Rob and I are in a play together. Rob has his character and I have my character. Well, we might do the director might have us do an improv scene where that puts our two characters in conflict. And it might be a very different conflict than the one is written in the play, because this is an exercise. So it might be like, I am trying to buy a banana from Rob for $1, but he only wants to sell it for $1.50, or, I'm trying to buy it for 50 cents. Rob only wants to sell it for $1. Whatever, just that there's some conflict. And then the idea is you improvise, you make up the scene, but you're trying to act only the way your character would, and only do and say things your character would. And especially because it's improvised, you have to listen more to your partner. You can't just wait for them to say their line and then kind of react to, and then just, say, do your thing. You actually have to listen to what they say, ingest it, and try and inhabit the thinking and motion of the character. And if you do this kind of thing enough times, it becomes kind of second nature, trying to make this more of a repetitive thing, and that's really what method acting is trying to be about, is making an approach to creating art that is repeatable, when that's not really the case. But so that's when they talk about improv, that's the kind of improv they're talking about, is these. And if you ever are in especially like a beginner's class, which is these things are going to be very circular, because these characters are at cross points and no one wants to give, that you tend to circle around an idea for a very long time, and oftentimes they end without any real resolution, because it's just meant to be an exercise. There's no real resolution to be had. So keep some of that in mind as we go through and then talk about the movies John will make later on. Like I was kind of getting off to, just a second ago, like, that really is method acting in a nutshell, is trying to say, like, if you follow steps X, Y, and Z, you will always end up in a good, acting result. Whereas acting is an art form where, it's not like, a sport where you can say someone doesn't have good technique, like, oh, that person blocking on, on that play in football, they're using poor technique. They need to improve their technique if they want to improve as a player. For acting, there are a number of different ways you can approach being an actor. Some people need to really get in, this more method acting, inhabit the head of the character. And, we have these stereotypes of, method actors never leaving character, but, that idea that you always have to be in this headspace responding so that you don't lose what you have. Other actors are very much like, as soon as you call cut, they're, dropping out of it, they're laughing. That's what works for them. I think, this idea that with the actor studio, they, and those proponents of method were starting to kind of say this is the only way you can do it. Not if this way works for you, you should do it. And, Cassavetes was a little bit more, there should be more free-flowing creativity, that the actor should have a little bit more say in the ultimate outcome, a little bit more input, as opposed to just, input, what's on the script, and output brood and anguish. So I think those are some of the differences. Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, now we have AI.
Well, I'm
It's not at the
sure,
same level.
yeah. Well, I'm sure, we'll have that, even more in the future, but, can an AI terrorize their co-stars by sending them used condoms and dead rats or whatever the hell Jared Leto does? I mean, really?
We'd be severely missing out.
Exactly. I mean, so anyway. It was at his workshop during an improvisation exercise that Cassavetes got the idea for what would become his first directorial film, Shadows. The film would examine race relations in the late Beat generation by following three African-American siblings, two of whom are light-skinned enough to be passing as they interact with the white world. John self-funded the project, raising money from friends and family. It was initially filmed in 1957 and was entirely improvised, with only Cassavetes' outline and his direction guiding the story. Released in 1958, it was poorly received. In 1959, they reshot much of the film, scripting it out this time, and replacing somewhere between half and two-thirds of the original. While this revised version of Shadows would struggle to gain American distribution, with it ultimately being released in the States by its European distributors as an import and didn't do much at the box office, it was a hit with critics. It won the Critics' Award at the Venice Film Festivals and opened doors for Cassavetes. He would move the family to California and make two movies within the Hollywood system, Too Late Blues in 1961 and A Child is Waiting in 1963. Both films failed at the box office and were not well received by critics of the day, though both have seen varying degrees of reassessment in the decades since. John overall struggled and strained within the studio system, and after A Child is Waiting after completing A Child is Waiting, set about to return to making films free of their interference. From here on, he would mainly take roles as an actor in Hollywood pictures to help finance his independent work as a director. Some of these roles would include The Killers in 1964, The Dirty Dozen in 1967, for which he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and Rosemary's Baby in 1969.
I mean, it's a smart move to just make your money doing acting. If you have the ability, clearly he's passionate about the art of acting. So if he's not doing well with making the movies yet, so he's like, okay, let's do the acting thing. Let's make the money so I can keep doing what I want with the movies. It's a smart system.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally get that. And I mean, there's, certain actors, even, try and balance, doing the movies they need to get paid and, keep their star at a certain level with movies they're passionate about, one for you, one for me, or like two for you, one for me kind of approach. So he's definitely a pioneer in that sense. Shadows, I did not get a chance to watch Shadows. Only the 1959 version is out there. It seems very interesting, with overall a fairly modern approach to race relations. It's still, the concept, seemed very cringy. The idea of a white guy examining the perspective of an African American in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Supposedly, like I said, I didn't get a chance to watch it, but supposedly it actually holds up fairly well and is fairly balanced, more than you might expect. But
I'll have to look that one up. That sounds like an interesting, I think you'll know in 20 minutes sort of which way it's going.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it, compared to some of his other movies, it's on the shorter side. It's only 93 minutes, but as we'll kind of discuss in this section, I watched a number of his other movies, and his style is leans a little more towards miss than hit with me. And I really just didn't feel like, I'd watched, four or five of his movies or something like that, at this point. And I was like, I've got enough. I've got the idea. I just don't feel like any more of work from this man. That, I can respect his talent and what he did, and I can understand why people like it. It just does not connect with me, so I did not feel like making my way through that one. But it is available, at least as of recording this. A lot of his movies are on Max, and I'm pretty sure Faces is one of them. With the money he made from his successful acting career, John would make his next film entirely self-financed, Faces in 1968. The movie tells the story of a modern marriage as it falls apart. Think Marriage Story for the late 60s. Shot mostly in his own home, its cast would include his wife Gena in a supporting role. The film was a big hit with critics, earning Academy Award nominations for Best Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor Seymour Cassel, with whom Cassavetes would work numerous times, and Best Supporting Actress Lynn Carlin. This would lead to his next film, Husbands, in 1970, starring Cassavetes, Ben Garza, who would appear in numerous Cassavetes films, and Peter Falk, as three men thrust into midlife crisis by the death of a friend. Falk and Cassavetes had met the year before, making the movie Machine Gun McCain, and will go on to become close friends, working together frequently, as we'll see shortly. In 1971, John made Minnie and Moskowitz, a romantic comedy starring Seymour Cassel and Gena Rowlands. To follow it up, John had an ambitious idea to highlight the struggles of a modern housewife has to face every day. He worked with his wife and mother of their now 3 children, Gena, to create the story, and she would go on to star as Mabel, a mother and housewife on the verge of a nervous breakdown from all the stress to conform and live up to society's standards and expectations. To play her husband, John enlisted his friend Peter Falk, who would also contribute to the financing of the film. This arrangement also involved John agreeing to appear in the first episode of the second season of Falk's hit show Columbo alongside Falk and guest star Blythe Danner, and technically Gwyneth Paltrow, as her mother Blythe is very pregnant with her throughout the episode, and it's funny watching them try and hide it. The film, A Woman Under the Influence, would be a big hit with critics, earning Cassavetes a Best Director nomination at the Academy Awards and earning Rowlands a Best Actress nomination. Gena would also win an actual Golden Globe for her performance, but those aren't real awards, so we don't count them. For his follow-up to the success of A Woman Under the Influence, he would turn to a tale of a small-time strip club owner whose gambling problems force him to try and take out a rival of the mobsters he owes money to. Originally released in 1976, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie had a runtime of 135 minutes. The film was a disaster, with even star Ben Garza hating it. Quickly pulled from theaters after 2 weeks, John would eventually re-edit, or possibly just edit for the first time, honestly, and re-release the film with a new 103-minute runtime in 1978 that would go on to develop a cult following. After that was the psychological drama Opening Night in 1977, also starring Gena Rowlands, which was well received.
The first film that you mentioned about based off a mother. What was the name of that first film?
Woman Under the Influence is the one about a modern housewife. Yeah, so I basically went through just about all of his movies here, and the ones I watched for this were Husbands, Killing of a Chinese Bookie, Woman Under the Influence, and Opening Night.
I think I like to think that Woman Under the Influence, that he is also just kind of recognizing the reality of his own wife balancing a career and motherhood, and just kind of taking all those considerations and adapting them into,
In theory, that's what it is. In execution, like, and this is like husbands and so husbands and a woman under the influence were very hard for me to get through. And we'll kind of talk about why later. I ended up accidentally watching both versions of Killing of a Chinese Bookie before I knew there were two versions. And I watched the really long one, crappy one first.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see the ghost of a good movie in there. And so the short version is much better. It gets, but the problem with husbands, and even a woman under the influence, for all the praise they get, for me, is just they are very self-indulgent. That they have that even when these movies are scripted, he still relies heavily on improv. And so, like in Woman Under the Influence, there is this interminable, endless dinner scene where Peter Falk's character comes home after a very long day, like working for the city, like, or the power company or something. I can't remember what he does. It's like some very blue collar job. And like they've been working all night, and it's like the middle of the morning, and like crack of dawn, and he wakes his wife up and insists and brings like all these guys from work and insists on cooking them dinner, and having this this scene of them around the dinner table just goes on and on. And it's clearly very heavily improvised, and like you kind of get the point of the scene like maybe 5 minutes in, but then it goes on like for 15 minutes total. And, it's very circular, very repetitive.
Don't know when to cut.
Clearly thinking, and this is somewhat coming from I think he's coming, from the actor's perspective of, all this improv is gold, when the audience, it's sort of like in the music world, like going on a really long solo at a certain point, yes, it's a very good solo, but, at a certain point you lose the audience. It's like, oh, this improv is really great, really great technique, really great little bits in there. But, at a certain point, for me, at least, and I'm just speaking for myself, and, just some of it, I just, especially like Husbands, and even more so, I just had a hard time emotionally connecting with his material. And, that's where I can appreciate this stuff on a technical level. I can understand why it is revered by certain people for its realism. It's just not going to be for me. And at a certain point, I find it a slog. And that's where I kind of also just went, I'm cutting myself off, because I'm not enjoying doing the research for this script anymore. And this show is supposed to be about having fun. So,
I think you want to keep it moving now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but opening night was interesting. Like, I think you guys, like, to you guys, especially based on how, you seem to have, how I'm guessing you seem to have responded to Gloria, I would recommend checking out opening night and the original and the new version, the second version, the shorter version of Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Both are on Max. For Killing of a Chinese Bookie, make sure you take the director's cut, because that's the shorter version. That's how it's labeled. But I think you might like those. Like with Killing of a Chinese Bookie, I could really see how that would go on to influence like Tarantino and like Paul Thomas Anderson.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Yeah, no, like the end of that, like I could really see echoes of the end of that in the end of in The Wrestler. The Paul Thomas Anderson, not Paul Thomas Anderson. That was Darren Aronofsky. But all those directors, their work, so But with all that now brings us to Gloria in 1980, the movie we're here to talk about. The script was originally commissioned by MGM as a vehicle for child star Ricky Schroeder and was known as One Summer Night. Schroeder had just had his big breakout role in 1979's The Champ. However, once Schroeder passed on MGM to sign with Disney and make The Last Flight of Noah's Ark, MGM was no longer interested in the script. So, then Cassavetes reworked it, changed the ethnicity of the child, and shifting the focus to now the titular Gloria. He then sold the script to Columbia Pictures with no intention of directing, as he had not made a film with a studio in 17 years. Columbia quickly attached Barbra Streisand to star, and that's it. That's the movie. So, story over. Kristen, take us through the... Okay, so Streisand dropped out and was replaced by Gena Rowlands. From here, there are two not necessarily conflicting accounts of what happened next. Some say it was Gena who wanted and asked John to direct. Others say it was the studio insisting he be the one. Regardless, John agreed to direct and began the search for the young lead. The production began by quote, contacting talent agencies, visiting local playgrounds, Saturday club groups, schools, and after-hour programs, which just randomly visiting playgrounds and asking kids, do you want to be in a movie, sounds super shady.
Yeah.
Is there a van involved? Like
in the Warriors? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah. But like all of this sounds like creepy. Like I'm not, if you come up and say, hey, I work for a movie, do you want your kid to be in it? Like that totally doesn't sound real.
Creepy for the 80s, even more jail time now. Yeah. People would not go, that would not go over well today.
But regardless, they did that until they narrowed it down to 400 potential kids. So let's make it creepier. Those 400 kids were then invited to a disco. Cassavetes wanted to see how the kids would hold up and stand out in an intimidating adult environment. Ultimately, first-time actor Juan Adams, credited as John Adams, was selected. Filming began on July 23rd, 1980 in New York City. Cassavetes wanted to avoid the touristy sections of New York City so the film wouldn't have a Woody Allen feel to it, which not wanting to have a Woody Allen feel ages very well going forward. Rowlands would do her best to stay in character in between scenes, more, kind of talking about the line between method and Cassavetes' approach. This almost feels more method, to try and help Adams' performance, as she and Cassavetes felt that her having a different relationship off screen with him than she does on screen would confuse the child who was not a professional actor. Cassavetes also used a number of actual mobsters in the film, including one hitman who got into an argument with the director over the realism of one of the scenes, which it's less funny that the, mobster had the audacity to be like, hey, that's not how it would actually happen. But the fact that the Cassavetes would go to this known killer, no, you're wrong, I'm not listening to you, to
That's
his
awesome.
face. There is no information on how long filming lasted or the wrap date, but it couldn't have been very long because it couldn't have been a very long shoot, as the movie would premiere at the 37th Venice International Film Festival on October 1st, 1980. So, we're talking July 23rd, they start filming.
Wow.
October 1st, they are premiering.
That's insane.
That is a crazy turnaround. I feel bad for the people having to edit that film.
Yep.
It didn't feel rushed watching it, so I guess
it didn't.
No. Especially like rewatching it. Like they have like a whole title sequence, and then they, we'll get into it, but they felt like they were definitely taking their time with it. Rob, Do you kind of want to see the version of this with Ricky Schroeder?
Oh, hell no.
So, for Kristen and the listeners who don't know, Ricky Schroeder is a very blonde-haired, blue-eyed. He got his start as a child actor. Like his big breakout was this 1979 movie, The Champ. But he was a big star on TV in the 80s with a show not long after The Last Flight of Noah's Ark called Silver Spoons. That lasted for a number of years in the 80s. Then in the 90s, he was the third partner of Dennis Franz, I think, on NYPD Blue. I think he's after Jimmy Smits, but before Mark Paul Gosselaar. So he's had an interesting career. I think kind of on the MAGA side of things now.
I looked him up. It definitely would have been a very different film. But also, like, he would have fit a brat character pretty well. Like, I mean, because it's kind of what the whole character is.
Yeah, I could see him coming across more bratty. That's a good word to use.
I didn't include like some of Cassavetes' intentions with the kid because I figured we'd talk about that in the movie. But overall, Cassavetes didn't want the character to be overly sentimental or like too saccharine, and he also didn't felt also kids are just naturally inconsistent, that they can be sweet and nice 1 minute and then do something completely horrible the next just because they're kids. We can talk, as we go on, how realistic the kid character actually is. But that's essentially what he was trying, or at least what he says retroactively, he was trying to do with the character. So, but so that's where we are. So with that, let's get into our black ties and gowns, since this is a big, film festival premiere. Take a gondola because we're in Venice. Get our tickets and step inside. Kristen, take us through the plot.
So here's our chance to talk about the opening scene you alluded to a little bit earlier. The opening credits, like you said, kind of takes time. There's this jazzy intro accompanied by lots of paintings, graffiti. We're seeing the city. We're setting the scene that we're in New York City, South Bronx. And we see Jerry Dawn. She's heading home with groceries on the city bus. And while she's on the bus and also just on her way to her apartment, she's feeling like something's off. Inside the lobby of the apartment building, she passes a man whose dress and appearance seems out of place, and she quickly boards the elevator, and on her way up, she encounters another man messing with the elevator, and she has to push past him to get off and get back to her door. And so back in her apartment, we meet her husband, Jack Dawn, who's an accountant for a New York City mob family, and he's been up to some bad stuff. He's been acting as an informant. Well, it's like good and bad. He's an informant for the FBI, but also he's been skimming off the top for this mob family. And so the mob is onto him. They're slowly learning that he's a rat. And so it's unsafe for anyone in his family to go out, which is why his wife was being followed coming back from grocery shopping. And his wife has had enough. She wants to get out, go into hiding before something worse happens. But before any of that can really happen, the doorbell rings. And it's their neighbor, Gloria Swenson, our main character. She asks to borrow some coffee, and Jerry pulls her in and tells Gloria that there's this impending hit on her family and begs Gloria to protect her children. Gloria, mind you, she doesn't like kids. Not her friends' kids, not anybody's kids. But she does reluctantly agree when she learns of the situation, because you see, Gloria is formerly a mobster's girlfriend. So she knows all the difficulties of being entwined within this life.
Yeah, no, it's
a good setup.
Yeah, no, it's a good setup. So, like with, Jerry, when she gets into, the lobby of the apartment, it's not just like she sees someone who's out of place. Like, the guy physically blocks her trying to go upstairs and, is like looking her up and down, like identifying, yes, this is the person, and then letting her, reluctantly letting her pass, and like she was already on edge even getting off the bus, and once you get in and hear the exposition between her and her husband, you're like, oh, this is why they are totally boned.
Yeah, and it's like it almost seems like the husband's like not even worried enough. Like he is, but he also isn't. Like it's his way. He's like acting like his wife is being irrational for wanting to run away. And it was like, dude, do you realize what you've done to your family? Like, what are you? Oh man,
it does remind me of like you're about to board a plane, but you got to get that sandwich real quick. And so all this like weird chaos is starting to happen, and you're feeling this tension, right? Because you have to leave, but you also are trying to squeeze in one other thing, and there's that feeling that's going on. I thought that the Buck Henry plays the father, who is the mobsters, finance guy who they're the one that they're going after, and they, he's got the book, right? All the finance guys always got the book. So, they have to find him and the book and just get rid of this big liability, which is the entire family, right? So Buck Henry plays Jack Dawn, and, Buck Henry is an actor, screenwriter. He's well known for being a co-writer for Mike Nichols' The Graduate. He received a nomination for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for that work. He also appeared in Catch-22, and which he co-wrote with Nichols, Mike Nichols. He, in 1978, co-directed Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, also receiving a nomination for an Academy Award for Best Director. He has a very long TV career, which included the new Steve Allen show. He co-created Get Smart with Mel Brooks. That's a staple, really. Classic. And other TV work included, like later on, obviously, was Murphy Brown, Hot in Cleveland, which I'm not even familiar with, Will and Grace, and 30 Rock. And I think afterwards he had a couple other more roles in minor movies, and then kind of faded out.
Well, he's in ton of, faded out because, he got into like his 80s or 90s,
Yeah.
It's sort of like
Hot in Cleveland is like a more modern, sitcom.
Yeah, it was like Valerie Bertinelli. I think Betty White was in it. It was about, like a woman, entering like more late middle age, dealing with that. It was like a Nick at Night original or something. This is like maybe 10, 15 years ago. And then, but Buck Henry was in a ton of stuff, known almost equally for comedy and drama, which is unusual. Just an absolute legend, and in a surprisingly short appearance in this.
I think he fits the description quite well, though, right? Because he looks like a finance guy, but he also has this look like there's shadiness to him as well. And the other thing you observe is that, like, why is like the finance guy in the mob in the Bronx, like, they should be living a little better than they are. So you start thinking about what's going on and what level of mob are we talking about here?
Well, and maybe he's being punished because the mob is famous for not liking race mixing.
Exactly, and that's the other thing too. So you kind of get this idea too that he's got a beautiful wife that I'll talk about in just a second.
Yeah,
that you kind of even speculate
much younger than him.
The only way he got her was obviously either because of the money or mob ties or some other kind of story here, because there's no way he just naturally. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it. He's like around Buck Henry. I think is like around 50 here or something. And his wife is like in her mid 20s.
And she's like I said, she's pretty attractive. Her name is so the mom's character's name is Jerry Dawn, but her real name is Julie Carmen. She's an actress, she's a dancer, even a licensed psychotherapist. Check that out. She rose to prominence in the 80s and 90s for roles like in Robert Redford's The Beanfield War and John Carpenter's The Mouth of Madness. People may recognize her also in Fright Night Part 2, Gore Vidal's Billy the Kid, and her recurring roles in TV series Condo and Falcon Crest, as well as La Doña in Tales of the Walking Dead.
Well, and it's up, like, you really have to know he's there, but in a very small part in the some of the, because there are all these various mobsters running throughout the movie, and especially in this opening, there are some mobsters that are searching, like trying to establish like what room Buck Henry and his family are in, and there's a taller one that's kind of starting to bald. Who comes up and says they're in room 606. And you see him a couple other more times throughout this sequence and the next one we're going to talk about. That's Tom Noonan, an actor I mainly know from several movies that were important to my childhood, which were Kane. He is Kane, one of the main villains in RoboCop 2. He is Frankenstein's monster in The Monster Squad. And he is the Ripper and also himself in Last Action Hero. And then he was also in Manhunter, the Michael Mann movie. But, he's been in a ton of stuff since. But,
you'll recognize him right away.
You'll recognize him, but it's also in some ways hard to recognize him because he is in a lot of makeup.
A chameleon.
Well, it's a chameleon, but like RoboCop 2 and Last Action Hero, he appears a bit as himself outside of makeup, but for the most time he's on the screen, he's in heavy prosthetics. And then as Frankenstein's monster, he is just in heavy prosthetics. That's another one because that's got so many kid actors. They actually kept him in makeup. Like the kids never saw him outside of makeup the whole time to, help with their performance.
Keep it creepy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he was a friendly Frankenstein. It was more like even the guy playing Dracula, really was aloof with the kids in between filming.
Already, one of the things that struck me that I like is that the realism of these gangsters, because they don't have the sharpest suits, even for that era. They don't have a lot of the stereotypical things that you would expect. They look like your blue collar. These are the guys who get down and dirty, mobsters. I mean, they're in the Bronx. So it was very realistic, actually, because, again, nobody looked very successful, semi-successful. It's more like, the bullies of the block kind of a look.
But you're also not going to send, the top guys to take care of this.
It's just a smaller thing.
So it makes total sense. So.
Yeah, so we're at the point now where Jerry and Jack, they're trying to get their kids out of there because they know what's coming, but their daughter Joan refuses to leave. She locks herself in the bathroom, and the family is attempting to get Joan out of there. But while that's happening, Gloria takes their son Phil out of the house, and with it, the incriminating accounts ledger, and they go to her apartment. And she doesn't really know how to connect with the kid. As she said, she doesn't really like kids, but they do find common ground with her cat. And not long after Gloria and Phil hide away in her apartment, the hit squad does come to the Dawn apartment, and it's implied that they are completely wiped out. And it's also implied, but also it's very obvious because you're hearing loud shotgun blasts from the apartment. And Gloria is really shaken by the outcome, even though, like they said, it was coming. And she decides that she and Phil have to go into hiding. So they quickly pack a bag and they try to leave, but the kid tries to run away from her. He's crying for his puppy. They do leave the building by Gloria half dragging, half coaxing him out. And this is like as the police SWAT team is entering with heavy weapons. At the same time, they're exiting out front, so they get out just in time. Meanwhile, this crowd of onlookers and news reporters have gathered in front of the building, and a cameraman captures the picture of them leaving. And Gloria and Phil, they take a cab into Manhattan, where they hide out in an empty apartment belonging to a friend of hers. The following morning, the phone is ringing, and Gloria tells Phil, "Don't answer the phone, don't go by the windows, I'll be back." So what does the kid do? sneak out of the apartment, of course. While on the streets, he sees a photograph of himself on the front page of several newspapers. He's trying to just wander around, gets a little nervous. He does eventually come back, but Gloria also learns from watching the TV that about the mob pit, but also that she is Phil's suspected abductor. And so she's got that to worry about. But when Phil does return and she's like, why weren't you listening to me? This is very important. He insists that he is the man. And to be fair, this is something that his dad said to him before he dies. It's like one of the last things he says to his son is like, you are the man now. And so he internalizes this, and he just keeps insisting that he's the man. He can do anything he wants. He doesn't have to listen to Gloria. But Gloria does, just kind of ignore him and helps him anyway, helps him with this nosebleed, and that kind of chills him out for the time being.
One little detail is that, but it's important, is that when Gloria took in the little boy, Phil, Phil brought with him this book, the financial book of all the
Yes.
Mafia's deeds are in there. So it's both a matter of the book and all those related to the book that need to die.
Right. They don't care that it's a kid. It's any loose ends.
Absolutely.
Man, the kid, it's like, I get it, because obviously he lost his family. It's traumatizing, but he was stressing me out. Both of the kids, honestly, I would have just thrown the daughter over my freaking shoulder and taken her out. Listen, I was like, it's like, I understand, when you're in a stressful situation and you're a kid, you're not going to make rational decisions. That makes a lot of sense. But both of the kids were stressing me out during this whole exchange.
In many ways, I can see how he would be the son of that man and the son of of the mother, because he's sort of this combo of the two, the way he acts. And at first, when you hear him, he's loud, and he has some very definitive things to say as a young little voice. And at first it's kind of funny, and then you're like, wait, he is growing up in this environment where he has to be this way. But then you realize, wait, he also has this false sense of who he's trying to figure it out. He's 6 years old, of course, right? So
yeah, he's this kid that is suddenly having all this pressure and knowing that people are after him and not quite understanding exactly all of the details, but knowing that he's in danger.
Yeah. So, I think the character was interesting. I think because, one of the more divisive points of the movie is the kid and his performance. That I think he is best when he is supposed to be portraying a scared, confused kid who isn't quite sure what is going on. And some of that's just because that's not really acting, like that would just be who he is. To me, the stuff that doesn't work as well is all the stuff where he is trying to quote unquote be a man. One, some of it is performance. But to me, some of it also was material that I thought, even to me, Rob, even with him growing up in that environment, that isn't necessarily what a child's conception of, especially just the words he uses and stuff, and how he phrases things and observations he makes when he's in "I'm being a man" moments don't match. They're too adult. They're too precocious. They're,
sorry, I completely understand what you're saying. I also think this is one of the things that I have noticed in my life being very culturally different. I have seen inner city kids, especially minorities, take this approach of learning how to live at an early young age, and it makes them either look very charismatic or clownish, depending on the circumstances.
But Rob, some of it's also just insights, asking about emotion and stuff like that reflect, that would be like you would say they were precocious even if you had them coming out of like a 13-year-old's mouth, let alone a 6-year-old's. And that there are, just a couple of scenes where, and to kind of like give some spoilers, that some of it is, that some people think, and Cassavetes even later joked about this, that a lot of the stuff between Gloria and the kid kind of mirror his relationship. And a lot of people just thought the kid was a little version of Cassavetes.
Yeah, there's definitely some letterbox reviews that are interesting. The theories that people have about what this film is trying to say about Cassavetes and Gena.
I think at this point in the film, we're not there yet, but later on, there's a scene when they're lying down and laying in bed together that I think that particularly comes up.
Yeah, but even like with some of her like just pushing him away is apparently like reminiscent of, that they joked that John would, kind of be jumping around her. And like this is something like even in the experts of Cassavetes on Cassavetes, like John kind of acknowledged, being aware of. And so, but like those are the elements that especially don't work for me because, again, they seem just unbelievably adult. And, it's not even like, to me, like this should feel like this character should feel more like a kid trying to wear his father's clothes than just, a kid saying all these adult things, that it should feel like a parody or like they're doing all these things, but they're not quite sure why or how they go together. Whereas
what it means, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, this was just a kid, going, okay, I'm an adult now. I'm going to talk like John Cassavetes.
Yeah. I kind of, I don't want to like go too long on this point, but I see it both ways too, because at one point he gets angry at her and it's like, you're a bad person. You're a pig. Like he's thinking of the worst things he can think of.
Yeah. No, I get it. So it'll be interesting to see, how the rest of the movie plays out. Right, kind of after where, like right as we're, here where we are with the, Gloria and kids on the kid on the steps, some mobsters start to come into the building. And one of them is a very recognizable actor, not like because of his body of work, just because he has distinctive features. It's an actor named Sonny Landham, who I mostly know from Predator. He's Billy, the Native American tracker from the group of, the military group Schwarzenegger's leading in the movie. He's also in like 48 Hours and some other stuff. I saw him in a really bad Chuck Norris movie called Firewalker. It was from the 80s. Which is funny because like if you remember in the Fitzcarraldo episode, there was the guy who worked in the steam engine room with the really lantern jaw who was really noticeable.
Yeah.
He's also in Firewalker. And like I remember talking in Fitzcarraldo episode about like doing the point, like the kind of DiCaprio point anytime I see that guy in a movie, just because he's so obvious. And Sonny is a bit like that too, where, once you see his name in the cast, you go like, oh, yep, nope, I spotted him. Kind of like the opposite of Tom, where like,
right.
Tom, I was going like I had to kind of rewatch it a second time to catch him because I didn't realize he was in the movie until much later. But Sonny, I was like, oh, know which one this one is.
Yeah.
So awesome. All right.
One thing that I want to mention too is you do get thus far in the film music, kind of jazzy music. I think it's Bill Conti, right? It's kind of very reminiscent of some of the kind of, I don't know what you call it, just the kind of music you would see in this era of a film. But I think it fits well. There's a couple parts where you could tell they use a Spanish guitar to kind of, set a scene, and with that kind of Spanish guitar, you're either going to go really hard like Gypsy Kings, or you're going to go really soft like they did. And I think it worked pretty decently.
Yeah, I think the music was very dramatic at points, but I think it like set the tone for it pretty well for me personally.
Yeah. Rob, love your shout out to Gypsy Kings, one of my mom's all-time favorite bands. But yeah, no, it's a soundtrack. Like, the movie is very well done. For me, there are just bits and pieces that, we'll talk about, especially as we go on in part 2, that just caused me to not connect with it as well as I would like. I still, spoiler, overall enjoyed the movie, but, it's just, some of it is just, Cassavetes' work in general, where don't quite connect with it the way I would like to.
Yeah, no, I understand. One other thing about music, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in part 2, but there was a song, a huge hit song from this movie. Well, inspired by this movie, because it's not actually in the film. The song was called Gloria, right? By Laura. Is it Laura Branigan?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
I don't know that song.
Oh, you got to know that song. That's like I don't know if it hit number 1, but it's a hugely popular song.
It's the one our editor sang the other day when we were doing the notes meeting.
Yeah. More people know that song.
I know he
sung the movie.
I know he sung the song when we were doing the notes, but that actually has nothing to do with this movie.
Well, yeah, but we're just bringing it up because it's...
No. Rob said it was inspired by the movie.
I thought so because it's...
No, it's
and
it's a cover of a 1979 love song composed in Italian, at least according to Wikipedia.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Man, the lyrics are like everything from the movie.
Yeah, you're always on the run now. Convenient, even if it's not based on the movie.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to check that out in between part 1 and part 2.
Maybe this is what is it? Urban legend, because my whole life thought that this
Mandela
was
effect.
With the movie. Yeah, right.
Mandela effect. That's what you're meaning.
Definitely, timing-wise, it came out around the same time.
Came out. Laura Branigan's version came out in June of 1982. It was recorded in 1981.
Yeah.
So, and spoilers. Laura Branigan died last year, August 26, 2024.
It's not really a spoiler. It's more just like a fact.
Oh, no, sorry. I'm misreading that because I'm reading this live as we're recording this. 2004. So she died a little over 20 years ago. She was only 52.
It was like,
well, I looked at the math and it was like saying 1952, and then, said she was only 52. I was like, that's not right.
Right. I didn't realize that Gena had died just this past August.
Yeah, no, it was after because she came up in our Light of Day episode, as we'll kind of talk about in part 2 in the aftermath. And so it was after we had recorded that, because it was after that episode had come out too, but we'd also been really ahead when we were recording some of those early episodes. So that had been recorded at like this time last year, even though it didn't come out until June. So, didn't have time to, do anything about it. But also, I know a lot of shows and podcasts these days talk about like the show Curse, where they talk about a certain celebrity and then they seem to die, like they killed them. So who knows? Maybe we killed Gena Rowlands. Or maybe it was the fact she was 90-something and had Alzheimer's. Who knows?
Toss up.
Yeah.
Trump movies out there. Oops.
Anyway, before we get into real trouble, I think that's where we're going to have to leave it for today. We will be back in part 2. But can Gloria and Phil stay one step ahead? Will they figure out a way out of the mess they're in? Can New York look any dirtier? Rob is really begging you to look dirtier, New York. Please, come on, do it for him. Yeah. Come back for part 2 to find out. Thanks so much to our editor, Javi, and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to my co-hosts, Rob and Kristen. Thanks so much to our sponsor, No Regrets, the spirit and music of Billie Holiday. And most importantly, thanks so much to all of you for listening. Please give us 5 stars, leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, give us a like, a follow, ring the bell, drop in the comments, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam. We'll see you next time on the Savage Movie Night Podcast.